And here's our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you from Beijing on CGTN. We begin today's program in the Japanese city of Nagoya, where the G20 foreign ministers are gathering. Based on the outcomes of the Osaka summit, protecting trade and multilateral institutions are expected to top the agenda. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi's attendance at the meeting is also another chance to boost the China-Japan ties ahead of Chinese President Xi Jinping's planned visit to Japan next spring. Before our discussion, take a look at this first.
Top diplomats of the G20 nations are gathering in the central Japanese city of Nagoya for an annual meeting. On top of the agenda are free trade and global governance. The two-day event started Friday and also involves representatives from international organizations, including the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. Chinese State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi is in attendance, as he also kicks off an official trip to Japan that will last until Tuesday. During the visit, Wang and his Japanese counterpart will hold the first high-level consultation meeting on people-to-people exchanges between China and Japan. Meanwhile, South Korea has made a surprise announcement that it will not terminate its military intelligence sharing pact with Japan for now. The pact was set to expire on Saturday.
On the meeting of the G20 foreign ministers and the preparation for Xi Jinping's visit to Japan, in Hong Kong we have Yoshikazu Kato from Japan originally, who's an adjunct associate professor at the Asia Global Institute of the University of Hong Kong. Also joining us in Beijing studio, Rong Ying, Vice President of CIIS, the China Institute of International Studies. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Mr. Rong, what shall we expect when the foreign ministers from China and Japan meet?
Well, of course, I think the Chinese foreign minister and state councillor, meeting with Japan, and always can be a big news, particularly in the context that I think we are expecting the first ever visit in 12 years by a Chinese president to Japan in spring, as now the two governments has already have said that in principle they have been there, and the Chinese side will accept the invitation. So for the G20's foreign minister meeting, certainly what on the agenda about issues are important, but it's always bilateral issues, bilateral interaction between China and Japan, and sometimes too important to overshadow the G20 meetings like that.
Mr. Kato, how much really this time G20 foreign ministers is really about China and Japan? Well, you know, the third factor, probably the United States, as a result of the recent issues, have become sidelined.
Of course, needless to say, G20 foreign ministers meeting, this is more than Japan-China relations. So, of course, we are focusing on Japan-China bilateral relations, but G20 is more than, bilateral. This is multilateral. So this time, Japan is going to host G20 in Nagoya. This is one of the most important manufacturing base in Japan, and like Toyota, it's a very important leading company in Japan. So focusing on some local cities. So we want to speak up from this very important city rather than Tokyo, our capital city. So this is a kind of a globalization, global but local. So we shouldn't ignore some locals, locals possibility or potentiality. And now we are going to talk about global governance, free trading system, and sustainable development. So out of various of themes. So this could be very much strategically related with Japan-China relations. So we could make it combined.
Yeah, you talk very fast, Mr. Kato. As a result of that, it seems it's a reflection of all the issues that has to be intensely debated at the G20 foreign ministers meeting even. Mr. Rong, this is, I guess, a relevant question that, after APEC this year were scrapped off as a result of what's going on inside Chile, the country itself, which is the host country. A lot of people put a lot of hope on G20. Of course, the leaders already met, but the foreign minister meeting is likely to be the last item for the year. So what's likely to be the outcome Many wonder, Mr. Rong.
I think G20, whatever, even though for G20's foreign ministers meeting is not going to catch the headline too much because the highlight, I mean,
but this year is different.
But this year is different.
Yeah, so what's going to happen?
This is different in the sense that I think some of the agenda, some of the issues that we're supposed to talk about in APEC might be taken over by...
Like what?
Yeah, for example, like the issues like connectivity issues, like the inclusiveness, development of growth, inclusiveness, and others. I think, which to be honest, that there are some kind of overlapping in terms of agenda. But I still, I mean, suspect that the foreign ministers meeting will be a good position, or would talk too much about take over these agendas, because as far as the foreign ministers meeting per se, the agenda, these issues are not a typical or not traditional one. So these are just meant to follow up the G20 summit.
That's right.
The outcome, our agreement of G20 summit meeting.
It's already clear. Earlier, the leaders already met. They have some agenda, and foreign ministers, as part of the government branches, is going to follow up on those agenda, but also to lay the foundation for next year. So this year, particularly, I want to come back to the topic of China-Japan. Mr. Kato, China and Japan in the Asia-Pacific region, because of the geopolitics, have been able to struggling back with some of the common consensus. Now, Mr. Kato, what can we expect when the two foreign ministers meet and lay the foundation for maybe an important visit from both sides toward one another next year?
Of course, we are expecting the next President Xi Jinping's state visit to Japan, but of course there will be a couple of more months. So we are trying to transit or preparing for something meaningful. But
what is meaningful to you, Mr. Kato? What is meaningful, quote unquote?
I think in terms of meaningfulness, I think first of all, to stabilize the bilateral relation between Japan and China, this could be the biggest contribution in this region, because everybody knows we have witnessed a lot of difficult times over the last decades. I mean, in terms of Japan-China relations.
Yeah,
so now,
but what does it take for Japan
speaking,
to stabilize this relationship, Mr. Kato?
Of course, we have had a lot of problems, like historical issues, East China Sea, and some geopolitical issues like Korean Peninsula, South China Sea issues, Actually, and of course, some territorial disputes. Actually, we have had a lot of problems to tackle. But now, beyond that, we relatively successfully, stabilized the relation. This very sensitive and complicated relation. This is not easy to accomplish. And now, one more point is how to deal with the United States. Mr. Motegi, the new foreign minister of Japan, actually he, before a couple of months ago, he was in charge of the Japan-U.S. trade negotiation. That job was really tough. And now he's back to the foreign minister. So now he is going to talk about how the Japan-U.S. alliance tackle the regional issues and how to coexist with the rise of China or something like that. So in terms of these relatively technical issues, we can talk about how to stabilize this region in terms of Japan-U.S. alliance and how to face the rise of China and some geopolitical issues just I mentioned about. So of course this is G20, more than trilateral relations. So, but at least Japan, as one of the advanced economy in this region, we need to lead this kind of discussion. This is meaningful for Japan.
I see. This is trilateral, but also beyond the trilateral. So, Mr. Rong, what do you make of that? Is this going to be one of those opportunities for the foreign ministers to think about what the Japanese panelists just mentioned as quote-unquote technical issues? But this is much more beyond technical issues.
Oh, indeed. I think from now on to the visit by President Xi, there are indeed several months to go, and several opportunities for the foreign minister and even higher officials to meet, to work out the agenda for the visit, to see how, what kind of relationship China and Japan is going to have.
So what kind of relationship do you think China and Japan should have? What are some of the options on the other?
Right.
Please go ahead.
I think there are certainly more than technical issues to work on. I think if you look at the terminology, the two sides agreed they are talking about a relation for new era. So we got to define what do we mean by new era. I think from the Chinese viewpoint, certainly they would like to look for something long-term, so-called strategic, and that would help stabilize the relationship, substantial the relationship for the years to come. So, for example, I think in that sense, I think there are some speculation that the two countries, the two governments may work for the fifth document as a guiding principle to guide the relationship in the years ahead, or the relationship for the new era. But there otherwise, I think I see that they would like to put something more positive, in the sense that both China and Japan had a strong sense of responsibility to take the lead in terms of addressing regional and global issues. On the regional sort of arena, you would find that the regional economic integration process, like these trade free trade arrangements, so on and so forth. And also, I think on the global issues, there are many global issues where the two sides can work together. That's exactly, I think, where G20 foreign ministers meet and others. And otherwise, I think because at the later next month, in Chengdu, they already announced that there's another summit. I mean, China, Japan, and South Korea. But of course, from Chinese side, that is being led by the Premier Li Keqiang. And then later on, there are other occasions. So I thought that there are still some time to go, but certainly I think the Chinese side are looking something more than technical issues.
I see. Mr. Kato, obviously, what China and Japan have in mind are also mini version of what the world, in fact, has to work out. Meaning some of the major bilateral and multilateral issues, the potential of the relationships, what kinds of mechanism, what kinds of institution. Now, these are all key issues for G20 over the years, this year's particularly. What's next? Because we have not seen much success yet, besides meetings, but implementation, and what to deal with about trade conflicts particularly, which China and Japan are both suffering from right now.
Yeah, our foreign minister already introduced, this year G20 foreign ministers meeting, we are talking about three things. One is free trade and global governance, and the second is sustainable development, and third is Africa's development. Right? So, these issues are very much related with Japan-China relations. For example, the third point, Africa's development. How? Japan-China, just Mr. Wang pointed to a new era for Japan-China relations. So we are trying to focusing on the joint cooperation in the third markets or countries. So Africa maybe could be one of the very important destinations for two countries. So this could be discussed concretely, more than symbolically. So these issues could be very much related with Japan-China relations. But at least the first point, multilateral free trading system. This should be our consensus in this region, more than Japan-China relations. But Japan and China, China-Japan, that's the world's second and third largest economies. If we can get consensus and lead this discussion, this is very much accomplished in terms of G20's meetings and characteristics. So particularly, this year APEC, in Chile, has been cancelled as unfortunately. Of course, I do not think, G20 summit could replace it. But, like Mr. Wang said, some issues and, challenges could be overlapped and tackled together. So this is a good moment to conclude this year's diplomatic event at this moment.
Mr. Kato, well understanding it's not the trade ministers that are going to meet later, but rather foreign ministers. Yet still, people have a lot of expectation as to, as you said, the second and the third largest economies in the world. What are they going to do with the latest development on trade and trade conflicts? You talk about consensus. Where do you think could be some of the areas of consensus between China and Japan, and also, of course, within this big framework of G20 foreign ministers? Mr. Kato.
First of all, multilateralism, free and fair trading system, it could be consensus. denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. This is our common goal to tackle, right? And how to stabilize and how to tackle the world economy's relatively downturning situation, and providing the stimulative, very important some wisdoms and products in this region, right? So these things could be discussed and relatively easier to get consensus.
Do you think
this
so?
is very much important.
Yeah. Do you think so, Mr. Rong?
Well, yeah, I agree. I agree with Kato-san's sort of a prediction that these are the important issues China and Japan can work on. But I would add one more, that is the Chinese vision or initiative to build a kind of global partnership for connectivity. That was a kind of idea put forward in 2016 in Hangzhou and later on being developed. I believe that with that initiative, this idea, I think there are certainly a lot China and Japan can work on in the context of G20, in the context of APEC, and also I think in the context of bilateral.
When there is a lack of consensus, the voices of China and Japan, being some of the largest economies in the world, are becoming ever more crucial, whether it is individually or collectively or in a big framework such as the G20. Now, Mr. Kato and Mr. Rong, before we wrap up this discussion, do you think the voices from these two economies at the G20 this time from the foreign ministers is likely to lead us somewhere bigger next year? Let me go to Kato-san first before I let you to wrap it up, Mr. Rong. Mr. Kato-san.
I think, yeah, it could be something bigger, and next year will be very much relevant for Japan. Of course for China as well. Xi Jinping's visit to Japan, and also Japan is hosting Tokyo Olympics. So and now the Abe administration, relatively stable, and our approval rate is kind of 47 points. So our domestic politics has been relatively stable. We have some power foundation to do something meaningful. From Japan's perspective. So this is very important for foreign policies and stabilize the Japan-China relation. So next year could be something bigger and meaningful. So this time G20 foreign ministers meeting could be somehow transition means. So this is important.
Mr. Rong, final word?
Indeed, I think as the G20, I mean the chair of G20, Japan's chair, is wrapping up, I think it is certainly always good for the two foreign minister meeting, particularly Chinese and Japanese, to work together to send a strong and positive signal that they are going to work together in a way to help bring our world in a better and a more stable, prosperous place.
We'll see whether that message is strong enough. Thank you so much, Rong Ying and Yoshikato Kato. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.